10x your service design offering with Smaply. Take 20% off any order with This Is HCD 20 off. Let's superpower you and your design team's potential. Sign up at smaply.app. Enjoy the episode from your friends at Smaply, helping support This Is HCD podcast.
Hi, and welcome to Power of 10, a podcast about design operating at many levels, zooming out from thoughtful detail through to organisational transformation and on to changes in society and the world. My name is Andy Polaine. I'm a service design and innovation consultant, educator and writer. My guest today is Douglas Ferguson, an entrepreneur and human-centered technologist with over 20 years of experience. He is president of Voltage Control, an Austin-based workshop agency that specializes in design sprints and innovation workshops. He's had several CTO roles at startups and was CTO at Twyla, where he worked directly with Google Ventures running design sprints, and now brings this experience and process to companies everywhere. He recently published his first book, Beyond the Prototype, which offers a 6-step plan for companies struggling with the shift from discovery to launch, especially the post-sprint slump. Douglas, welcome to Power of 10.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we get to the book, it's interesting, or to me at least, that you've held CTO roles rather than design roles. And you've also got a pretty mixed background in terms of disciplines. I mean, I'm not casting aspersions on your background. How have you ended up here?
Yeah, it has been a varied career, and I think that's really a testament to my kind of spirit for continuous learning and always just being curious about what might the next chapter look like. And I did start off as a software engineer early in my career and got handed this lesson around, technology for technology's sake is no good for anyone. And while we were really very proud of the technology we had built at Core Metrics and had amassed quite a nice array of customers, Omniture came in and just started to eat us for lunch. And it was really a better user experience that they were delivering, but we just didn't have that language back then. And so as an engineer, I took note of that. And as I became a leader in engineering and product, I was really focused on kind of how we assemble teams and get the most out of the work we do. And since there weren't really product leaders in the organizations that I was joining, I was kind of wearing both hats. So kind of chief technology officer by title, but also holding this kind of chief product officer role and serving that function. And so I had designers working for me and got to hire and work with quite a many talented designer. And so I kind of got a design degree just by working alongside those folks and really kind of worshiping the awesome ways that they were approaching problems.
But I mean, given that you're no stranger to the creative process there, right? Because you've also got this music and recording background, right?
Yeah, of course. I didn't. That's a great point. My mother was a piano player and became really just infatuated with music at a very young age and started playing in bands in high school, and then was recording bands on the side for hobby and college. And well, I guess you could call it even a part-time job. I was massing equipment and doing various things like sound reinforcement for concerts and recording bands and whatnot, and then slowly accumulated pretty much a professional recording studio. And so that's just been a labor of love, if you will. It's really hard to run a recording studio business just with so much amazing. We were just talking before this podcast about so much amazing consumer gear that's available. You can get these Yeti mics that sound so great for $150 versus the studio equivalent would be, for that whole setup with the mic, the preamp, and the converter. We're talking $5,000 minimum.
Yeah, I don't know if you listened to Malcolm Gladwell's Broken Record podcast, and they were talking about I can't remember who they were interviewing, but it was someone incredibly famous who was talking about when he set up he built a recording studio in his home in like the 70s or the 60s and stuff, when back then that was such a major act to do, to have all of that kind of equipment in there. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a piece recently that I didn't expect to write, which was it was about learning from Ed Sheeran, because my daughter kind of got into him. And then I ended up watching the songwriter documentary. And one of the things that struck me then was how amazing it was that he was able to basically have a recording studio on the tour bus, at least good enough to do demos. Recording studio on a his producer is scared of flying, so they took a ship across the Atlantic, and they had a recording studio in there, and the ability to kind of just produce something very high quality kind of on the fly, but also very iterative. So he would sort of have the kind of bass track roughly, and then go, I think I've got a partial bit of a verse, and just sort of looping the track around, he'd kind of drop that bit in, and gradually they would sort of build it up incrementally. And I obviously found lots of kind of parallels, obviously, with the design world. So let me try something on you, which is that when musicians go in for a recording session, and particularly because they are often, booking a chunk of time, a recording session is really the musical equivalent of a design sprint.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Not everyone approaches it from that perspective, though, because sometimes when they're booking that kind of chunk of time, especially when you're talking musicians that are starving artists, then they're trying to maximize that time. So they've demoed a lot of stuff at home and kind of gotten everything ready. So then it really it counts, right? So they're in there to nail it, which adds a lot of pressure and performance anxiety, and you're not necessarily getting the most creative takes or and whatnot. And so I as you were telling this story, it really struck me just this iterative design process around with the creation of the 4-track, where people can kind of carry these things around, and then that resulted in musicians like Beck, who are like 4-track musicians, right? And it invented its own genre in the way. And the thing I'll say is that comes to mind for me too is I really like to use the studio as an instrument. And so it really comes alive as a creative process where folks that don't own studios and think of it more as a place to just go capture and document what you've done, I think they think of the studio quite differently.
I think that was what was also interesting about Ed Sheeran using his loop station, was kind of just to really restrict his palette in many respects to himself and the loops. And then what you were just saying about artists they have to really nail it. But they've done quite a lot of kind of prototypes, basically. The demos are the prototypes of the songs, right, up front.
Absolutely.
And so they kind of roughly know, they know the form and the shape, and what they're trying to do is nail it on the day. But one of the things about having that kind of pressure is it forces you to kind of make decisions and move on, rather than kind of spend ages getting it perfect. And I think, possibly second album syndrome is partly that thing of you now got the luxury of more time in the studio, and so you're desperate to get it kind of perfect, and it never will be, and so it kind of slumps.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'll say is I think that's one of the reasons why analog sounds so much better than digital, because in the digital world you have endless options. And with tape, there's this whole notion of I got to wait for the tape to rewind. There's a certain amount of like meditation you have to do while you're waiting for that to happen, and then you're maybe reluctant to do another take if it's an ordeal. Whereas like in digital, you can just exhaustively just grind it until you take all the life out of it. And so I agree. There's definitely there's like a notion of perfection that that is elusive, and sometimes like those magical moments that weren't perfect are so much more meaningful or beautiful.
Yeah, that reminds me of John Morica, who's a very well-known sort of designer and artist and musician actually too. He once said, I used to really like it when computers were slower, because whilst it was rendering, like Photoshop was rendering a blur or something like that, I'd think about what I want to do next. And I definitely noticed a thing that happened around the kind of early 2000s, I think, where there were a lot of kind of conferences about Flash, and people kind of doing that, when the whole kind of vector art stuff and generative kind of vector art design and art was very popular, where it was all about the kind of speed that everyone could work at. And I remember at the time thinking that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, because I feel like that it sort of got quite mindless. And, arguably I still kind of complain about this with sprint culture, actually. So let's get back to sprints. It felt like a book that was one of those books that kind of had arisen out of hard-won experience, and it felt like a kind of let me save you from some of the pain type of book. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I was on a quest to try and sort these things out for my clients, and I was also a bit, it's a little bit of imposter syndrome too. Early on, I was like thinking to myself, man, how did I mess this up so bad? And then when I started noticing that
everyone does it,
others were running into this, and then my clients it was happening to my clients. And then I was going to the Sprint conference and realizing that I was hearing a lot of other people running into these issues. And then I think it's also the reason why hackathons are so horrible. I think they're the epitome of this, right? Because they're not, at least the design sprint tees it up in a much more interesting way. And there's much more hope that with that you can land the plane, but there's still a lot of intention and care that you have to take to this, and there's literally no handbook of what to do after.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And so you've split the book up into these 6 steps. Do you want to kind of just quickly go through them? I really want to get back to the kind of the post-sprint slump that you really start at. But tell us how you sort of came to those 6 steps.
Yeah, I was ultimately just thinking about all the things that would have gone back and done differently. And then as I interviewed people and ran workshops around this concept, it was the things that I just kept repeatedly hearing over and over again. And then I started to kind of organize them into logical categories, and they kind of fell linearly. And, it's not a perfect science because there's definitely some steps that you could do all at the same time. But I think just from a mental model, it's nice to think from them as linear steps. And so I laid them out in that way. And in fact, I'm working on version 2.
That's iterating the
version
book.
2 is going to have, that's right. Well, it's funny that Beyond the Prototype was a prototype.
Right.
Actually was working on a book with a co-author, Karen Holst, and we are wrapping up that book now. It's looking like it's going to launch in April. We had so many questions about how we wanted to handle different scenarios, and it really, I started to realize that a lot of those questions could only be answered in actually doing this, making a book, right? And so I thought, well, why don't I write a book and answer some of these questions? And it just turned into a much bigger project than I had anticipated, and I ended up just deciding, hey, this is a prototype, I need to get it out the door. So I have a publisher now, so I'm looking at version 2, and I'm going back and I'm adding a new step. So I'll give you a preview of that step even.
Okay, great.
One of the things, and I really struggled early with my first editor because we were kind of trying to decide whether to include this or not, and I kind of included it as like this Design Sprint 101, and I'm actually going to make it an official step in this new version, and it's called Set the Stage.
Right, okay.
And so, and the thing we really struggled with was, since this was about the design sprint slump, it's like, well, your preparation and is before the slump. But I'm so adamant now, because it's come up still so many times, that the best way to avoid the slump is to not get in it or do things that are going to minimize it, right? Because the deeper you go, the harder it is to get out. And there are things like picking the right decider. And, that's one of the number one things I see people mess up with the design sprint is, assigning that role to someone who doesn't really have the authority, or someone who does have the authority, delegating it to someone, but not really delegating. Like they just undo it later. So it's like, what's the point of doing all this hard work if you're just going to let people undo it?
And you mean sort of asking for input, but then saying, well, I thanks for that, but I think we should do this. In my experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or now you're getting into some meeting science stuff, which we're really passionate about right now. And it's like, if you're going to have a meeting to make a decision, make it very clear, set that expectation. If you're just collecting information and you're going to make the decision, make that clear. Yeah. The problem is when people don't make those intentions clear, and then go into the meeting, and then everyone has different assumptions. And
let's come back to the meeting thing, because I definitely want to.
Of course. Yeah. So the thing I'll say is that the set the stage is so important, and there's just things to consider, and making sure you execute a great workshop in general. And the design sprint's got its special components that you need to consider. So just making sure those things are done correctly will just make sure that you come out with the momentum that you need, or that you should get. And I'll say one big issue is that it's a 5-day process. It's heavy artillery. You shouldn't be just throwing it around willy-nilly. But when there is time to do it and you're super convinced it's the right time, and it's easy to get hung up or caught up in this whirlwind of convincing people to do it. And the people that, hold the purse strings, even the decider, getting them on board, the participants. And so you spend all this time selling people on it, and then it almost takes on this life of its own, right? And it's easy to lose sight of the fact that the design sprint is not the whole thing.
Yeah.
It is just the first step in your journey.
Yeah.
But you spend all this time convincing people to do this stuff, and sometimes I think people oversell it, and then they come out with all this momentum, and then they don't know what to do with it because everyone's like been sold on the fact that, okay, well, this is the thing, and it's like, well, yeah, but we still had to support it afterwards, right? And and so understanding that and setting those expectations. Also, sometimes this work can, if you're really focusing on something truly innovative and looking at what might be new possibility and unlock real potential, then there is a chance that will be no home for this thing, whatever it is that you create, based on your business and the way it's structured. And so being open to that and being ready to engage those conversations is, again, just setting the stage, getting expectations in order, so that once we're there and we have this momentum we're not used to experiencing, that we're going to at least anticipate it and be somewhat ready to deal with it. So that's the first and foremost thing, set the stage. Then you have to wrap up your work. So revisiting any of the questions that you set forth for the design sprint, any new questions that surface during the user interviews, and any insights that yield more new potential that you might need to get more clarity on. It's important to iterate on the prototype and just to continue to learn. And then you need to think about what kind of governance structure that the team that's going to be operating on this. There might be success and failure metrics. There may be, modes of working. Like, are we going to follow an agile type process? A lot of times these teams that are spun up around these kinds of projects aren't really governed by the same rules, that the normal product team will be governed or whatnot. And so just making sure there's operating agreements on how we're going to make decisions and how we will do our work. And
can you give an example of that? Because you cover quite a lot of ground in just in that little bit of that switch between the teams that, or can you unpack that a little bit? The teams who are doing the sprints are not governed by the same kind of rules or process either the team goes on to be doing or the teams that they're then going to work with are doing.
Yeah. So sometimes in larger companies, especially if you're doing kind of explorative type stuff and you're kind of harvesting potential kind of innovative type of projects, then those teams aren't necessarily the teams that actually build product and launch. They're not commercializing or scaling up kind of products, and so they may not have processes for building. And so how do you think about the process by which you're going to kind of build these things, or are you going to follow a kind of development sprints? Are they 1 week long, 2 weeks long? And the fact of the matter is, even if you have those processes, a lot of times these teams are constructed of cross-functional members from other teams.
Yeah.
And when if you're anything like Spotify, where every team's allowed to kind of pick their best kind of preferred way of functioning, then some of these rules need to be adopted. It's sort of like Monopoly house rules, right? It's like we need to just agree on how we're going to play the game together.
Yeah.
And so it could be as simple as, are we going to do 1 week or 2 week sprints? Or are we even doing Scrum? Do we do stand-ups? Or what's the culture around how we govern ourselves and how work gets done day to day? And on the decision-making thing, there was specifically one example where the team that got put together didn't have a clear leader. There was someone from the engineering side and someone from the product side that were considered kind of co-leaders, but there weren't really clear expectations set around who was going to be the ultimate decider, and there's no tiebreaker, and two leaders, and it created some really unfortunate dynamics, especially when the product leader's manager, the senior vice president over product management, came asking questions, and they also didn't have success and failure metrics clearly identified. So when those questions got posed, there was no clear way of indicating how well they were doing. There was no way to track, progress, if you will. And so when those tough questions came, it was really easy to start doing finger pointing because they didn't have really reliable stuff to lean on.
Right. One of the things that I noticed about the book that I found kind of really interesting, actually sort of looking back at it when I was preparing for this podcast, was you spend, I don't know, you've got Design Sprints 101, and then you go into I'll talk through the chapters actually. You've got the post-sprint slump, wrap it up, share your story, chart the course, expand the inner circle, cultivate the culture, get guidance. And then you've got your bonus chapter, which is sprint planning, which I'm guessing is the thing that will be setting the stage perhaps. But the thing that struck me looking back at that sort of table of contents of those chapters was there's only really kind of, 2 chapters that are actually about sort of doing the design work and the kind of creative process, if you like. A big chunk of this is really about communication, right? It's about how, you're talking about how to share your story, how to get people on course. I mean, it's planning too, right? But there's a lot of content in here about how to get people to, so there's things you were just talking about communicating amongst themselves and making decisions, but there's also a lot around how do you get other people on board? How do you gradually expand it? There's this lovely thing we say to keep things bite-sized when you're cultivating the culture, to reduce the blast radius of your project and the potential for leadership freak-out moments, break the work into small, manageable pieces. So there's a lot of stuff around that, which is about kind of how teams operate and agitate within an organization, more than actually kind of what you might think that a book about sort of design sprints is about, which would be, how do you come up with the most amazing ideas and so.
Yeah, and it's definitely a kind of, I think, speaks true to my background and my interests, because, I really focused on how to help teams do their best work. And I'm kind of somewhat process agnostic, and I'm a big fan of kind of what design sprints have made possible. But I'm not really too concerned about how people, the approaches they take within that framework, even if we're doing a design sprint, right? Because they may have their own vision of how to approach the design, and to me, it's more about, hey, can we use this as a tool to have a conversation and to get the room intelligence kind of flowing and humming, and build some momentum, and then make sure that we're everyone's informed enough to harness that momentum and keep it moving. Because at the end of the day, it's if we can drive outcomes, it's kind of irrelevant how we get there.
Yeah, and it's the sort of Achilles heel. I was talking to you and a few other people that we know about this masters I teach over in Switzerland, and the thing I'm teaching is about leading conversations. And it's my colleague Jan Eckert who kind of came up with this thing, said, the one thing that is a really major part of working as a designer, especially a designer inside an organization, is being able to kind of communicate and communicate with other stakeholders and get them on board and stuff, and communicate your ideas. And that's the sort of the thing you're not actually really taught at design school. You're taught a lot of process at design school and a lot of methods, and it's changing a little bit now. But actually this stuff, like you, I think, have probably a similar experience where I get asked to go and train a team and work with a team. And, we do some method stuff, but actually it's sort of the conversations afterwards about, but how are we going to I can't convince this person to do that. And how do we get people to the higher ups, or, to how do we sell this upwards and so forth? And there's a bit where you say, is your company poised to promote, know thyself, that's right. Is your company poised to promote innovative entrepreneurial culture? And even if they say they're ready, do they really mean it? I thought that was really kind of telling. Because I think a lot of us have probably been there, despite the language of innovation is kind of everywhere, but the actual practice of it kind of isn't. And setting the preconditions for that to work is a lot harder than some sticky notes. So tell me about you sort of got this interest in meetings. I can imagine, like a lot of us have probably spent far too much time in really rubbish ones, why that's come about. But tell me about your view on meetings and weathering the sticky storm, you said.
Yeah. Well, it's like just like anything when it gets overdone or misused or it's almost like the design thinking equivalent of agile, where so many people just glom onto the practices but don't understand the principles.
Yeah.
So when I see someone writing user stories and it's basically they've just got the Mad Lib and they're just plugging in variables into the blanks.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, that's not a user story.
Yeah.
It's like you're just filling in a little form. It's like, how about we really think about like what's going on here and like create a dynamic story that we tell with the team that we can go and get to a deeper alignment and understanding around. Okay, now we're talking.
Yeah.
And so these sticky storms are the equivalent, right? It's just like, oh, let's just throw some post notes up here. We'll do some clustering and we got a workshop. And it's like, man, it's almost like the sticky storm is the pathological version of bad meetings, because they've taken what can make a meeting, they've taken what a meeting, what it could be amazing about a meeting and turn that bad too.
Why does that happen, do you think?
I think it's just a lack of it's laziness maybe, and also somewhat like a fear of like an inferiority thing, where they hear something and they want to appear that they know it, and without having any time to master it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, I see, I can do that too. Because so the thing is like simple things can be really powerful.
Yeah.
And that can be very surprising. And if people see the simple thing that's that someone's taken a lot of time and care to make simple, and they try to repeat it without really understanding the why, that's why we get into trouble.
I think as designs become more strategic and moved or sort of mixed with business so much, in that kind of situation, I think that's one of the things that's happened is the craft, if you like, or the technology of that strategic stuff is pretty simple. Right? Writing things on a sticky note and sticking it on the wall doesn't seem like that's a thing where you look at and go, well, I can't do that. Which, if you're looking, say, like a traditional graphic designer or a musician doing something, someone who's not versed in that looks at that person doing those things and go, well, I'm unable to do that. That person has a craft skill that I don't have. And I think part that it leads to this kind of conflation of, because I know how to write on a sticky and put it on a wall, I therefore know how to, spot, to cluster, affinity cluster in a way that's intelligent, or to spot patterns, or to break things down, and so on and so forth. So a lot of that part of that process, and a lot of the kind of synthesis as well, is seems very abstract from the outside, and is almost invisible. And I think you don't get the kind of same evidence of craft that you do in those other kind of disciplines or traditionally. And I think that's probably why some of those things go bad.
There's a 2x2 that explains what you're describing. So there's, let's see, unconscious incompetence.
Okay.
And then you move into conscious incompetence. So you become aware of your incompetence. So then you're able to build skill, and then you become consciously competent. And then true mastery is when you're unconsciously competent.
That's very nice. Where does that come from? Or is that yours?
I don't know the source of that. I heard it from a peer coach of mine as a model that he uses, and
pretty nice.
Yeah, I just totally came to mind when you were talking about this stuff. I was like, it's totally that model.
It sounds, it's very akin to systems, thinking and complexity theory, where you've got the classic, known knowns and known unknowns and all of that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of that, I was thinking of Brian Eno a little earlier, and because you were talking about, the advent of people making home studios and these things, and Just the fact that I named my company after my obsession with synthesizers.
Right.
And I would always tell people how as I was programming my synthesizers, it was very similar to working with teams, and just the complexity of, making one change over here will have all these ripple effects through the system.
Yeah.
And so I just had this metaphor in my head of, whenever I worked with my synthesizer, it just felt very similar. And I'd actually sometimes solve problems with the people problems that I had just as I was kind of patching these. And I think it just triggered interesting similar parts of my brain. And I recently was watching a documentary on Brian Eno, and I found out that he read that first book on cybernetics.
Yeah.
And that's how he developed his technique for music. And I thought it was really so fascinating. It made me love him even more, because I was like, I arrived at similar conclusions, but through using the synthesizer, probably maybe inspired by him and others. But he actually developed this whole methodology by the inverse way, right?
Right. I think it's, this is why I was kind of interested in your background, because I think that having some other thing that you're, deep into, and I'm very sure it does kind of cross wiring in your brain where you go, well, I see that in a way, I can't not see that through this other lens. I mean, I studied film and so filmmaking, and I still see a lot of ways of working like that, and I still see a lot of parallels and a lot that can be learned from the way filmmakers work.
Reminds me of Creativity Incorporated with Ad Catmull talking about Sharing the Ugly Baby early on all the Pixar films. Such an awesome book, one of my favorites.
It's highly recommended read. So I've got a question for you, actually, which is, how do you deal with one of these questions? You probably experience clients or teams or stakeholders who've said, listen, we want to do a sprint, but we only want to do it for 2 days. Or can we do it for 1 day a week over the next 6 weeks? Because we can't really take everyone off of the work to do it. How do you deal with that? Do you just say it doesn't work? Or do you have some kind of magic solution?
Yeah. Wow. So much is context dependent, but usually my answer is, if you're thinking along those terms, you probably don't have a problem that's well suited for a design sprint. Most of the time, design sprints are going to be used for something where people are really stuck.
Right.
They haven't been able to make progress, or there's this new project and they know that it's going to require, the brain trust, if you will. And the only way to assemble them is to actually make it intentional and make it happen. And so most of the time, if I encounter people that are wishy-washy on it, then we'll have some conversations just to see if their concerns are rooted in reality or they're just nervous. But usually that's an indicator that it's just not a good time for a design sprint, to be honest. And the thing is like, as a steward of the process, I'd much rather convince someone not to do it, rather than have the name get tarnished, because there's just so many design sprint training classes and so many people just spitting out sprint masters that I think that there's definitely I even heard a CEO once said, my problem is that I just don't know when to do a design sprint. And I was like, man, that's a weird problem to have.
So you worked directly with Google Ventures, right? So you kind of learned from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, early on, the fascinating thing to me was what are the things that they're really adamant about but weren't in the book.
Okay. That's why your book exists.
Right, because well, yeah, I don't even talk about a lot of that stuff is stuff we'll put in when our design sprint trainings, and even Jake trains them. But the thing is like the book has to be packaged up with stories. Yeah. It has to be stuff that anybody can kind of grok and understand. And so there's a certain level of nuance that you will pick up on when you're actually doing these things together. And it's like, oh, wow, that's really fascinating. Why that, it's super important. And
come on, spill the beans.
Like even the 7-person thing. Well, like the 7-person thing, right? Like it's in the book, but like, man, they were like really adamant about it. And like, that's something that you could gloss over. And I even have clients all the time want to send 20 people to a design sprint, and they've read the book. And if they didn't have me, they would be doing it with 20 people.
Right.
And so I think there was things that they learned from not only being just amazing designers and, you know, like you were saying, they're skilled in the craft, you know, they've done this and they're professionals, but they also, on top of that, had the opportunity, a very unique opportunity at Google Ventures to go do this week after week after week after week and refine it and dial it in. And so there's just certain things you just pick up just observing them that, and there are probably things that I'm not even articulating, you know. I just know that there's a certain level of confidence after having just observed and worked with them kind of coming out of it. And so it's like, it's hard to even put that to words sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It can sometimes seem really pedantic, that stuff. I mean, it's the same as, you know, facilitating a good workshop. You know, tiny things make a big difference sometimes.
What about the desktop kind of flip-up Post-its?
Flip chart thing.
These are the Post-it notes that are zigzagged. And so they're designed to go in the holder. And
the concertina
so that
ones.
means every other one, the stickies on the bottom and the thing's just flipped over. Facilitator woes, man.
I know. I used to throw those across the room all the time at Fjord when we got those. There was always kind of a couple snuck in there. I used to hate them. The show is called Power of 10. It's after the Eames film Powers of 10, and it's all about this film about the relative size of things in the universe. And so I ask all the guests, what one small thing that is really well designed or needs to be redesigned has or would have an outsized effect on the world?
Well, this is very top of mind for me right now with the COVID-19 issues that are circulating around. But I think the online meeting interaction, Zoom has like leapfrogged everyone, and I think other meeting systems started to catch up, but I definitely felt a massive difference between just quality and consistency once and that's a testament to their growth, right? And while there's still, you know, there might be people out there that complain about it, but I can tell you before it, because I lived in those days with other companies, which I won't name, but like, you know, just horrible connection issues. And part of it's too, connectivity is improved, et cetera. But the thing is, there's still a fidelity issue of, as a facilitator, I cannot tell who is engaged and who isn't. I can't build the same level of rapport. So, you know, if there are ways to gauge sentiment of people in the room more deeply, level of engagement, to be able to easily call on people, there's a depth that's missing that really is detrimental to doing virtual workshops. And I think with Zoom and Mural, we get really close, but there's still a missing element that I'm really hungry for. And there's some incremental things, like I've been feeding Mural lots of ideas because I get really excited about this notion of being able to facilitate the digital space like I could a real wall. And there's just things that I can do. I can walk up to the wall and do some very dramatic things that I can't do digitally. And so, but I think ultimately the 10Xer would be to have some way to have a real connection and to be able to like understand deeply to just deeply connect with people in this virtual meeting environment.
Yeah, reading the room is one of the real arts of facilitation, isn't it? Well, we're coming up to time. People can find the book on beyondtheprototype.com. Voltage Control is voltagecontrol.com. And you're amazingly on Twitter as I said the Doug, but you said the DUG.
That's right.
You're going to be a little while.
Sure, yeah. As we talked about my history as a musician, and back in the day, it was the mid '90s, and I was in a math rock band. If anyone knows what math rock is,
a math rock band. And what's that?
Yeah, I was in a math rock is kind of it's maybe to the untrained ear would sound kind of like hardcore or punk or something, but it's a very specific genre where it's very angular sounding, almost robotic at times. And the reason it's called math rock is because it involves a lot of counting, because you're using really odd time signatures.
Okay.
Yes, and it's so a lot of stops and starts. The drummer's like grabbing the cymbals, so it's muted and. Anyway, it was fun stuff. Really enjoyed it, and my band Imperial was and the fun thing about Imperial is we used to have loops of stormtroopers, and we'd have stacks of TVs, and these loops of stormtroopers would be playing while we were behind us. And we were on tour with one of our pal bands called Regraped, and we were all very drunk one night and decided to give ourselves hip-hop nicknames, and so I was christened the DUG.
Very good. That sounds that band and everything just sounds very mid-90s. It's very good. So people can find you as the DUG on Twitter. Douglas, thank you so much for being my guest on Power of 10.
You're welcome. It's been great to be here.
Thanks for listening to Power of 10. If you want to learn more about other shows on the This Is HCD network, go to thisishcd.com, where you'll find ProdPod with Adrian Tan, Decoding Culture with Dr. John Curran, Ethnopod with Jay Hasbrook, Bringing Design Closer and Getting Started in Design with Gerry Scullion, and Talking Shop with Gerry, myself, and some of the other hosts. You'll also find the transcripts and links to this show, and you can sign up to our newsletter or join our Slack channel and connect with other designers around the world. My name's Andy Polaine. You can find me at polaine.com or apolaine on Twitter. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.